see what is my threshold. I did that with sulfites. Mine's around 70 or 80 parts per million for sulfites, maybe a little lower than that if there's not a lot going on. But yeah, it's an interesting experiment to do. It's just make up little batches and then have them labeled blindly by somebody else, and just go through and see where you can actually detect where you can detect something different. It's a good thing if you're going to be judging too, so then you'll know, you can recognize that later on.
What does it taste like?
They've actually found that some people, their threshold is as low as 30 parts per million.
Yeah, so I've heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So besides the sorbate itself, if you over-sorbate it, the sorbate it can actually degrade in alcohol, and you can get ethyl sorbate, and that's like a pineapple aroma. So that's because that's the reason why if you use sorbate to protect your sweet or semi-sweet needs, it puts a shelf life on it, and it eventually will degrade. And don't ask me how long the shelf life was. I really couldn't find a source to say how long it is. But basically, a mead like that is not meant to be aged and stored long term for years or anything like that.
So how would you describe the sorbate taste?
The sorbate, if it's the straight sorbate that hasn't been aged into ethyl sorbate, it's supposed to be. Some people describe it like a bubble gum, but once it's the converted sorbate after being in the sweet mead for too long, then it's supposed to be like pineapple or celery. And I've actually never tasted that myself because I drink mine faster. I don't leave them around. Again, I might want to leave it around to see what happens.
You need to make some more then.
Yeah. Well, and maybe I need to make some, and then I need to set it aside and open a bottle every 5 years and see how it tastes, so that maybe I'll recognize it as a judge, because it's really hard to be able to recognize something. You might recognize something that's not supposed to be there, but being able to put into words what it is and what was the problem, it's a lot harder if you've never experienced that. So yeah. And then another trick, you can use sulfites as a sanitizing compound too. It's relatively cheap, and you mix an equal amount of sulfite powder and citric acid, and I think it's like a few tablespoons of each, and you put it in a gallon jug, and I use it to pour it down the sides of my fermenters. If they're really dirty, I'll make a solution and I'll just soak it in there. But you can just use it as a rinse on there too, and you can rinse it off. If there's a lot in there, I'll rinse it off, and I won't want to leave it in the mead. But a little bit of the sulfite gas that's actually in that, you put that in your carboy, and then it actually has a sulfite gas within that carboy. So sometimes I'll do that before I store them too. So I have cleaned them, like say with PBW, an alkaline cleaner, and then I might do the sulfite citric acid, or if I need to, I might use the Star San or something like that. But I'll use the sulfite citric acid, and then I'll plug the carboy, and so there's sulfite gas in the carboy killing things, while I'm just leaving it sitting there until I'm ready to use it. So yeah, I'm not sure what else have we not covered with sulfites and sorbates.
Why do you add the citric acid? So I've always just used sulfite itself.
For the sanitizer, it supposedly makes it more effective because acid makes the sulfite more active, and that's supposedly why you do that.
I see.
I find when I do it lasts longer. Because I do the same thing. I've got a spray bottle and a 2-liter mason jar of sulfite solution, and I use I don't have citric acid on its own, so I use acid blend. But I find that it lasts longer in the mason jar before it stops smelling like sulfites.
Yeah.
If I use the acid,
I can spray it on my hand first and sniff it and go, "Yep, that's still good."
Yeah. Oh, I just sort of do the whiff test over the jar, and if that doesn't work, because though I can drink this stuff with impunity, apparently inhaling it is not a good idea for me. I have to go spend some quality time with my inhaler if I actually inhale too much sulfite.
There's also a way to store barrels with a much more dilute solution, and I can't remember what it is. Ideally, if you have an oak barrel, you don't want to leave it without anything in it, and some folks, rinse it out. Some people, they even still burn like a little bit of a sulfite strip in there to put the sulfite gas in there. But you could also do they have a mock wine recipe and with sulfite, and I think it has some acid in there. You don't want to do it in your barrels too long because it'll remove the oak character. But that's another thing that you can do: keep your barrels moist so they don't dry out. And I can't remember the recipe on what it is. That we learned it in our winemaking courses, and I have it written down somewhere. But I haven't had to deal with any barrels until recently, so I don't have that formula memorized.
Bob on the live chat is asking if you've got any comments about sulfites and bottle conditioning. Carbonating sweet mead.
That's a good question because if you sulfite too much and you're trying to carbonate within the bottle, that could be a problem.
Yeah, when I do it, I don't tend to carbonate at all, or I don't tend to sulfate at all if I'm going to do a bottle carb job.
Yeah, and that would be something that you would drink fast. I mean, we don't add sulfites to beer. I mean, the hops are a little bit protective, of course, but if it's a session mead that you want to bottle condition and you want to drink it quickly, then you probably just don't even sulfite it. It's also a problem if you want to do a malolactic fermentation, which we don't do a lot for meads, but I've done with some of my red, like my Piements, and I've even done that with some of my berry melomels. And so the malolactic fermentation is with a different bacteria, and they're very sensitive to sulfites. I mean, that's why you use them in most of your mead and wine. So you wouldn't really want to sulfite those either. When I carbonate, I just usually force carbonate it just because it's easier.
Yeah, well, it's not an option for everybody, and the way if you're trying to get something that, if you want to get something that's sweet and carbonated, bottle carbonated, then there's some interesting hoops to jump through.
Oh, it looks like Bob has the formula for barrels: 1 teaspoon of potassium beta, and then 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid.
Cool.
Yeah, so I don't know what if there's any. Have we covered everything? I was just kind of rambling on.
I've been going through your outline that you made, and we have jumped back and forth a bit, but we've covered it all.
Yeah. I'll eventually get this. I'll go through again and make sure there's not any mistakes because I saw a few as I was reading through. But I'll probably eventually post it up on our forum just for future reference.
One thing I wanted to give to our listeners, the analyzers for sure are probably out of reach for some of our listeners. I think the Van Metric has gone up to about $600 now. Is that, Tom? When was the last time you priced that?
I think it was $485. I think.
And that was just recently.
Yeah, that was the SC300. I think.
Okay. I know the Hannah I think is about $900. So that puts it. That puts it out of the range for a lot of people, especially being this is just a quote hobby for some of us.
Exactly.
But if you guys want to look at some different opportunities that you can afford, if you go to the morewine.com website, they have a articles section there, and within that you can find an article. What's it called? It's called SO2 management, and that will go through all of.
Is that the one on winemakers?
Well, it's on.
It's a great.
Yeah,
it's a great article.
I've got the one that they posted on More Winemaking, and it's linked in the show. It's linked in the show page.
Okay, so in the very last,
it's a great article.
Yeah, it's very easy to understand, and it gives you step by step. Also, on the very last page, there are some different, much more affordable ways that you can go about determining. Now, it won't measure the total SO2, but it will measure the free SO2, which is really, for the most part, all we really care about anyway, as hobbyists. And so go and check that piece out. Apparently, am I correct, Vicki, that it'll be on the website, so people can
it's
go.
already there on the.
Already there.
Yeah, it's already there on the page for the episode tonight.
Very good. So on the last page there, guys, there's some different options that you can afford to buy. Some of them are a little more accurate, and of course the accuracy comes with a little bit more of a price tag, but they're certainly available and affordable for probably just about anybody that has a job. If you don't have a job, go get one.
Bobby just came up with a comment, and he says there was a post the other day where a commercial mead maker said he uses potassium sorbate, which stops the yeast from multiplying but leaves the yeast active. The yeast continues to eat but can't multiply. My understanding is the yeast will peter out as CO2 builds up, thus bottle conditioning.
I got in an argument with that guy.
I don't.
With Bobby or with the guy who posted it?
No, with the meadery owner, and it was a nice argument, and it wasn't really an argument.
I don't think that's true. Because it interferes with some of the enzymes, but I don't think it's going to stop.
It's not going to. Actually, what I have read says that that's exactly what it does. Is it stops them from dividing. So that, it's possible to, if you've ended up with a juice that's got sorbate in it, then what you have to do is make a really, really, really big starter without using any of the stuff in it, and then just go with that, and you may have to restart it several times because the yeast can produce alcohol, but they can't breed.
I'm worried that it might stress the yeast, and anything that's stressing the yeast can cause off flavors and off aromas. So my understanding is the sorbic acid interferes with enzymes that allow metabolic things, basically cellular respiration. So, if the cell is not having, active metabolism and cellular respiration, no alcohol's going to be formed, but it's maybe not going to want to do other things too. But I'd have to see somebody that has to do an experiment and publish it, and not just, an opinion. Actually measuring, what actually happens when you do that.
Well, and I actually contacted him on the side. In other words, we got from the front page of Facebook, and we messaged back and forth a little bit. And I said, "You realize that if in fact what you're doing is what you're doing," and I wasn't challenging him that he was lying, but I said, "You're the only person I know in the whole world that can do that." And he said it's come about through some trial and error, and there's only one particular yeast that they can figure out when to do that to make it slide into home base, so to speak. And he didn't offer to give me any information, so I didn't ask him about that particular strain. But he's got a very unique situation there that he's been able to hardwire after playing with it for a while.
Okay. Just because no one studied it or published it doesn't mean that it can't happen. But
right.
Well, there was a lot of stuff that we hadn't studied or published before that was happening all the time. And
Hamish, there was a question a while back that somebody had.
Yes. Bear with me.
I think they were asking about oxidation during oxygenation, yes?
He said, if you keep the must in suspension for a full month with a drill attachment, how do you prevent oxidation?
Okay, so some clarification needs to be there. And who's this from, Daniel?
Daniel Ivey, yeah.
Yeah, so Daniel, when I spoke about keeping the yeast in suspension, the word there, the appropriate word to keep in mind is rouse, and to rouse the yeast is significantly different than to be actively trying to oxygenate the yeast with stir. In other words, once you get past, I would say probably the first sugar break, you don't want to particularly try to oxygenate anymore. All we're now trying to do is only to keep this yeast roused in suspension, and so you're really only politely stirring it to keep it from piling up on the bottom. And so in doing that, we're really not creating a vortex that's going to suck down oxygen into your must. And with it still actively giving off CO2, it's protected from any of the oxygen above. You'd be surprised when I make my stuff before I bought my jacketed fermenter, I was making things in trash cans, and I would wait until it appeared to be dead, meaning I couldn't really get a sense that there was any gas coming out of my trash cans that were 20 inches across. But as soon as you put that, quote, dead meat into a carboy and put an airlock on it,